Welcome to Funny They Don't Look Jewish, where Judaism appears in the panels. Our purpose is to find characters, stories, and issues of comics that explore explicitly Jewish content. I'm Brandon Bernstein.
I'm Henry Bernstein.
No relation. Well, hello, Henry. So good to see you again. Well, not see you, but hear your voice at the very least.
It's great to hear your voice as well.
I'm especially proud of us because we're recording like 2 weeks after our last episode instead of letting 2 months go by.
Or 4 months or the whole summer.
Or however long it might be. We're back, baby. We're doing it for real.
Yeah. What are we doing?
Well, I thought that we would continue since last time it was so much fun revisiting our old friends and seeing what we might have missed. Let's keep going with it. You know, we're doing our own sort of version of like Chazarat Hashatz. You did your listening silently, and now we're going to repeat it out loud with the superheroes. Judaism's full of opportunities. What happens when we finish reading the Torah? We go back and read it from the beginning. What happens when we finish a tractate of Talmud? We say, Hadranalach Talmud. We're going to return to you. So Hadranalach Ragman, Hadranalach other superheroes. But you hear who we're starting with. We're going back, Henry, and we're going to get a couple comics that we missed the first time around that show us a bit more Jewish content, both in a positive and a negative light. So let's start with the good stuff.
I think that's a great thing. Let's start with the good stuff. We're looking at the all-new Batman, The Brave and the Bold, Volume 1, number 14. Small Miracles, written by Sholly Fisch, penciled by Rick Burchett, inked by Dan Davis, colored by Guy Major, lettered by Dezi Sienty, and edited by Jim Chadwick. So I see a familiar name there, Brandon, from one of our most favorite episodes. This was written by Sholly Fisch.
Good old Sholly Shalom Fisch. What a mensch, what a guy, what a writer.
I'm, of course, talking about our Colossal Boy episode where we read a delightful story by Sholly Fisch where the Teen Titans celebrate Hanukkah.
And, you know, another piece in common that's interesting, Henry, is the Colossal Boy episode, that Teen Titans Go comic was based on the cartoon. Now we're following a comic once again in the style of a cartoon, and that's why we missed it the first time. This is outside main DC continuity. It's part of the expanded multiverse. But more realistically, listeners, you may or may not be aware that once upon a time, there was a Batman cartoon, not the ever-loved 90s Batman cartoon that I was hooked on, but rather Batman, the Brave and the Bold. Did you ever watch that show, Henry?
I've seen bits and pieces, certainly not live. I mean, of course, I watched Batman, the animated series as it was airing as a middle schooler. Certainly, I've like checked in on his other ones. Like there's a CGI show he had for a while called The Batman, I think. There's been like a couple cartoons since then that haven't been quite as good. So I've seen bits and pieces. This is definitely oriented towards kids. It's like, you know, Marvel Superhero Adventures, that comic.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's very much, it's in an animated style. It's more geared towards kids, which, by the way, love when there's comic books for kids because I got into comic books as a kid. I want kids to be able to read them. But yeah, it's very much, you can see the influence of the Paul Dini sort of house style that started at the Batman animated series and went on to Justice League and all those others. And eventually The Brave and the Bold is sort of a bit more of an edgier version. And we see it in the style, you know, it's almost like animated house style of the art that Rick Burchett is giving us. So starting off, we have narration that brings my heart such joy to read the words, of course, not everyone celebrates Christmas. I love it. It's a quote unquote Christmas comic, holiday comic that starts off showing some people around a Christmas tree, I believe, like celebrating. But then, of course, not everyone celebrates Christmas. And then it moves us to the familiar to us. If you've listened to our Ragman episode, and if you haven't, maybe pause this, go back, give it a listen, come back to us once you're familiar. We see the now familiar to you Rags and Tatter shop, where our good friend Rory is working. And we see a customer who's another rabbi. This is Rabbi Samuels. I believe this makes it the third rabbi we've covered having some sort of relationship, Ragman. But
with Rory,
anyway,
yeah.
Yeah. So Rabbi Samuels is going on and on about the fact that his shul needs repairs. And beyond that, he also needs to somehow get the money for the Hanukkah celebration, which is tomorrow night. And I'm a little baffled. Usually, Hanukkah is not exactly the most important holiday, but like, you're planning it more than a day in advance. So usually you should get the funds a little earlier.
Right. I would think like the board, at least, okay, let's look at our budget for the year. What are we spending on the Hanukkah party this year? Like you think about like the one thing at your fledgling shul that will definitely get people to come whenever we have our Hanukkah party. So you think they would have, even if it was, something.
But in the cruel slums of Lower Gotham, there's not even the budget for that. And so Rabbi Samuels needs money to repair his shul.
I would like to make a donation to Rabbi Samuel's shul. So at the very least, so that they can have a proper Hanukkah party next year.
Listeners, we've set up a GoFundMe to help Rabbi Samuels and his Hanukkah party in 5783. All right. Rabbi Samuels is trying to basically, because it's a pawn shop, he's trying to pawn his watch. And Rory, mensch that he is, refuses to take it and just loans the rabbi the money. To which the rabbi responds, "You're a good boy, Rory, just like your father, Jerry, rest his soul."
And by the way, he owns a pawn shop, but Jews can't charge other Jews interest. So I'm sure Rory is like upholding that Jewish law and not going to charge the rabbi interest, of course.
Maybe the rabbi was just testing him. He was like, you've passed your halakhic exam. But the rabbi does have discerning eyes because he notices up in the corner a menorah that is not being used and encourages Rory to take it down and use it. But Henry, I believe you have a slight issue with this menorah.
Well, once again, we see a 7-branched menorah. Now, if that was going to be used for the Sabbath in the temple or even just in a home, fine. But it's clearly meant for Hanukkah, which means that, I'm sorry, Rick Burchett, I don't mean to call you out. You didn't do your homework. You didn't talk to Sholly.
God, we need to come up with a sound of like a ding positive and a buzz for artists drawing Hanukkahs. And when they get it right and when they get it wrong.
Yeah, maybe a really good tekiah versus a sputtering, shofar.
Yeah, the low sputtering shofar. Although respect to every shofar blower, I know it's not easy.
Totally.
So, but we're not talking about the shofar.
Brandon. But seriously, Brandon, how many times have we seen this in a comic? We've seen Hanukkah a million times, and I feel like we're talking about this a lot, about the 7 or 6 or whatever 5-branch menorah.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can think is that, they're clearly not thinking ahead to send reference material. And so the artists are Googling these things on their own and they see menorah and they probably see, this is actually funny. I've seen the discourse shift over time. For a while there, I remember people used to be like, on Hanukkah, it's not a menorah, it's a Hanukkah. We should call it something different because it's, the menorah is the 7-branched one that goes in the temple and the Hanukkah is the 9-branched one we use at Hanukkah. And then I saw people responding and kind of being like, oh, you're so pedantic calling it a Hanukkah. It's menorah is fine. So I've seen it go back and forth. But one advantage of having 2 separate terms might be the fact that then when people are looking them up for reference, they don't mix the 2 up. Anyway.
I feel like it's okay to use both terms depending on who you're talking to. And
I
feel like in a comic, it's okay to call it a menorah.
Oh, 100%. I'm fine.
Provided you get the number of branches right.
Totally. Yeah. I don't care what people call it. And I just find it interesting and funny that I've seen those shifts and back and forth. Anyway, Rory wouldn't know why we're making such a fuss about these specifics because he goes on to say he's not religious, so he's not going to light the Hanukkah menorah. And, love you, Rabbi Samuels. He responds, not even to light a menorah? Nonsense. Jerzy Reganowitz might have changed his name to Jerry Regan when he came to America, but he wouldn't. And he kind of trails off. I love that this captures that sort of Jewish immigrant experience, that fear of assimilation, the idea of people being less and less involved, but also I don't know, Sholly, I feel like even the least religious, and like even Jews I know who will come up to me and be like, oh, I'm a bad Jew, I don't do anything. A lot of times they're still going to light the Hanukkah. Like, it's not like lighting the menorah. They're like, whoa, too religious for me. They're just like, sure, I'll light it if it's around.
I guess people don't know what to do with Rory, writers specifically. Like, he's either both deeply troubled and traumatized by his Judaism, or he just knows all these Jews and like rabbis and talks to them, and it's fine.
Yeah, and he like somehow knows the weirdest things, and then is like, there's like very common things where it's like, no, lighting a menorah at Hanukkah is too Jewish for me.
Right.
A few pages later, we see that what appears to be gangsters have invaded the synagogue. Just think of your typical Gotham hoodlum from your animated Batman show of choice. And they're shooting out a window. And Rabbi Samuels is shocked at the fact that they're trying to kick him out. I should get out from my own shul. What chutzpah! I'm going no place. So he has drawn a line in the sand and insisted this is his place. The gangsters say that it's their neighborhood. And then what do you know? The entire neighborhood shows up for the rabbi to support him, along with Ragman. And this shouldn't be a surprise given what comic it is. I'm Batman. So we actually have literally this moment where Batman comes and saves the rabbi, and we're going to go ahead and read some dialogue. So, Henry, you can be Batman. I'll keep being the rabbi.
Good work. You keep them safe, and I'll do the same for the rabbi.
Give that Cossack one for me, Batman. I love a like joyfully cheering little rabbi encouraging Batman to beat up thugs, but like, I don't understand why like this rabbi is such a stereotype that somehow every enemy of the Jews, even a gangster in 21st century US, is somehow from the 19th century Russian army.
Right. Like what's Sholly working out here on the page? You know, like what kind of inherited generational like Ashkenazi Jewish trauma is he trying to work out?
Cossacks everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's also really cool to hear Batman, to see Batman very joyfully. This is not like grim and dark Batman. This is like smiley Batman. And he's like so happy to be helping a rabbi. And that's awesome. That's just great.
It's amazing. It's wonderful to see that. And like the rabbi cheers him on.
Yeah.
They finish the fight and Rabbi Samuels is cleaning up after the mess. I love it because this rabbi is not afraid to do his own manual labor. Reminds me of all the wonderful rabbis I know who spend time setting up chairs in the shul, prepping for the events themselves, putting up the tables. Like, you know, he's not afraid to do this stuff.
I don't think this shul has a full-time maintenance person. I don't think they can afford it.
Are you telling me the shul that didn't have money for the Hanukkah party the night before the Hanukkah party might be struggling to retain staff? Rabbi Samuel says, even though it's kind of a, difficult neighborhood, he stays there because the people need him. And worse has happened to him at this time of year, right? Thugs coming in and shooting up the place. He's seen worse, which then leads us into the obligatory retelling of the Hanukkah story. Which,
of course,
honestly, at this point in the podcast, Henry, like yeah, you all know it. We know it. Yeah. If you don't know it, go listen to a past episode. I'm pretty sure we talked about it in the Kitty Pryde episode. I'm pretty sure we talked about it in a possibly. We definitely talked about the Colossal Boy episode. You can hear us cover the Hanukkah story
in the Doc Samson episode. We talked about
that. We talked about it. So anyway, we get this lovely multi-panel page that tells an accurate but fairly parve version of the Hanukkah story. There's Greek soldiers, there's Maccabees, there's a miracle, there's no oil, etc.
But by the way, there's the menorah in this, and I mean an actual menorah because it's 7 branches, is awesome. It's a massive. It like takes up a whole panel. It's like 10 feet tall.
Visually, it's gorgeous. I mean, they were inspired by his work writing that story with Colossal Boy.
Yeah.
He looked at that and he was like, menorahs are giant, right? They're the size of cities. So anyway, the rabbi tells the whole story. Rory, in the guise of Ragman, is less impressed. He says, that was a long time ago. No miracles today. He reminds me of every Hebrew school student I ever had being like, why aren't there miracles now if God used to do them all the time for us? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, Kids ask it, adults ask it. It's a question worth asking.
This is a guy who literally has a enchanted robe that gives him powers that encases all the souls of dead people, and he's wondering where the miracles are.
All right. You make a very good point. It's a good point, Henry. And it just kind of reminds me like the silliness of a world of superheroes where you have like an alien from Krypton who comes in. It's like what things that we think of as absurd conspiracy theories and fiction, like what becomes beyond the pale of belief for those ones. Like I love the idea that he's like, I have a magic suit and I've met an alien from another planet and fought alongside them, but miracles, come on. Who believes in that? Superhero comics, I love them, but I love it even more when we get a tiny bit of Torah, like Sholly puts in the words of this rabbi who says that every single person around them is a miracle. Ugh, even Ragman, my heart. It reminds me of, I feel like, very commonly when I was in rabbinical school and we'd get to the part of the prayer service that, the sort of morning blessings or what we would call Nasim B'chol Yom, the miracles of daily life, where you go through and bless God for allowing you to open your eyes and be able to clothe the naked and be able to, even stand up, right? Like all these sorts of things. Like it reminds you that like, oh, actually like life itself is quite miraculous. Us showing up for each other is miraculous. So, right. It's like, it's very sweet. The rabbi says this and the rabbi goes on, who needs Superman? You're missing the point of the Hanukkah miracle. God could have made the jar of oil burn forever, not just 8 days. Or he could have helped the Jews find hundreds of jars, not just one. Instead, he provided just enough. Why? To teach us that even though nobody gets everything they want, God gives us what we need. It's some beautiful Torah brought to us by Sholly Fisch, B'Shem Keith Richards.
Do you think he, nice Rolling Stones reference there.
Thank you.
Such a good song. Sorry. Now I'm going to go on a Stones rant.
I like the slow catch up of like the song as Henry's like, I want to keep it. Wait a minute. Yeah.
I wonder if he heard this at like in a sermon somewhere, or at shul, or maybe a rabbi, like maybe he was at shul like the Shabbat before Hanukkah, and like that's what he heard in the sermon or something. I don't know.
As I was reading it, I was literally just thinking to myself, dang it, why didn't I look into whether or not this Torah is like some Hasidic Torah from somewhere? Or like I wish that I could find. So listeners, if you have heard this Torah before about the oil being just enough to teach you that you get just enough and just what you need, please let us know. I would love to know the source for it. Sholly, if you're somehow listening and would love to hear it. And if it is your Torah, Yasher Koach, sir. Well done. So in the follow-up to the follow-up, the next day, the rabbi rushes in joyfully to tell Rory, who he did not know was Ragman, or maybe he did. Rabbis sometimes are very perceptive in these stories, but he rushes in to tell Rory that an anonymous donation came in for the shul with enough money to cover all of the repairs and the Hanukkah celebration. The implication, of course, being that Bruce Wayne provided that anonymous donation. And yeah, like Henry, how do you know that it wasn't someone Jewish who gave the donation?
I don't know, Brandon. How do you know it wasn't someone Jewish that gave the donation?
Because they kept it anonymous. I also love the idea of like if it wasn't anonymous and then it's just like the Bruce Wayne Synagogue of Lower Gotham.
Right. Well, that's so funny because Wayne does put his name on everything, but does he put it on charities? I feel like he definitely puts it on like his businesses, but I wonder.
I mean, in this case, it's probably anonymous because otherwise the rabbi's like, why did Bruce Wayne give money to my synagogue?
Like, I'm sure at some point, like, there's like, the Bruce Wayne Home for Wayward Boys or something, over the last 80 years of Batman. I'm sure there's like Wayne things, but that would be so funny. Like the Bruce Wayne Gotham Jewish Day School, like.
Oh, it would be amazing. It would be amazing. Can you also imagine if there was like some guy at the IRS just like reviewing the tax information for Wayne Industries and was like, how come Bruce Wayne makes anonymous donations at all these places where Batman fought once? Oh my God.
It makes me think, though, it makes me also think about, I really like the idea of Batman interacting with the Jewish community of Gotham City, because like in the Marvel universe, we know what the New York Jewish community is. We know, if you've ever been to New York or you're Jewish, like I would love to know what the different Jewish communities of the DC cities are. Metropolis and Gotham are allegories for New York. Is their Jewish community exactly the same? We know
that there's a Jewish community that's worried about Cossacks. There's another one that's worried about Crusaders. There's another one that's worried about Nazis.
That's true. I mean, we've seen the Jewish community in Opal City. We've seen it in Gotham. Yeah.
After learning about the donation, Rory thinks to himself, maybe that rabbi was right after all about small miracles. And so he pulls down the menorah to light. And the true Hanukkah miracle of the story, Henry, is that now the menorah has 9 branches. It's the same menorah from earlier in the comic, but now it magically grew 2 extra branches. It's a Hanukkah miracle. And he pulls it down, and we see him saying, I love Sholly's approach to brachas in this. He's clearly a writer who does not want to write out the fullness of the blessing and say,
God's name.
A blessing is defined as having Shem v'Malchut, or the name and dominion or kingship of God. So, to be able to say a blessing in a way that it's not levatala, not in vain, you just say the end part of the blessing rather than the common opening. So we get that end part, who performed miracles for our forefathers and foremothers in those days at this time. And then the story ends with the lovely image of a menorah lit in the window of rags and tatters while Batman watches and enjoys.
Oh, so good.
Enjoys the light.
Don't you wish someone would have invited him to the Hanukkah part, so light with him, and we would have gotten, I mean, obviously it's not in his character. Like, of course, Batman's going to be watching over from afar, but it's a kid's comic. Like, what if Batman could have
Exactly. It's a kid's comic and it's a holiday comic. They wouldn't think twice about Batman showing up to like save Santa Claus at a Christmas party. So like, yeah, you're right. It would be lovely to see Batman like playing with the kids at the Shul Hanukkah celebration. But
I don't want to take anything away. Like it's great. And I'll post the images as I always do on our Facebook, and it's a great image of like Batman silhouette looking over rags and tatters with a huge, correctly branched Chanukia, I think, in the window. And I just, do I get too greedy? I always want like a little more, even when it's really good.
I'm really glad you asked that, because I've been thinking about this also. I think it's not that you get too greedy, because I also feel those ways. It's that I think as much as we found content to fill this podcast, there really is not nearly as much Jewish content as I would like there to be. And so when I find something really good, it's such a taste of what I love that I can't help but be like, oh, and I want this little bit more. Like maybe it's in it. If you give a mouse a cookie, right? If you give a Henry a Jewish representation in comic books, he's going to ask for more, maybe. But I think it's really just like, how can you not point to it and be like, yes, this, but more of this. I'd like to see even more. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
Like there are TV shows and characters where like clearly it's not the main focus, but a large part of the show involves Judaism. Like, like popular shows like Marvelous Miss Maisel, right? Something like that, or Curb Your Enthusiasm this past season. Like, and I think what would make me not like want more in these moments is if there was just, for the characters that are Jewish and are regularly written, if just one little realistic aspect of Judaism was peppered in here and there. Like if like The Thing or Kitty Pryde, like someone who we see regularly had something mildly Jewish, just to remind you, like that's a part of their character, then maybe when like, we save it up for the big Jewish moment, I'm not like let down a little bit. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
This was a great issue.
It was an amazing issue, and I really have no complaints, especially compared to what we're going to cover next. So
it's a shame we do these things in chronological order, because now we're going to rain down fire.
It's fine. Look, we started good. We're going to go down, but like I know for a fact that the episode ends on a good note, so we'll be fine. In 2017, Ragman received a brand new series, the third volume of Ragman, as part of DC Rebirth. Henry, besides a branding initiative, what was DC Rebirth?
Yeah, well, I mean, for one thing, that's truly what it was. We have to go back a little further. In 2011, DC Comics made a drastic choice to end 70 years of continuity, essentially, and just start from scratch all of their comics. So what that means is that, like, and by 7 years of continuity, I really mean since 1986. So not 70 years, like 25 years, whatever.
Right.
30 years.
DC Comics, as opposed to Marvel, is sort of known for every, I don't know, few decades or however long, deciding that they want to like clean up the multiverse and clean up continuity. And so 1986 gave us Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is that famous story that eliminated the multiverse and brought us just one prime universe.
Right. And so then they brought the multiverse back and whatever. Everything was going along fine. Like everything, comic sales were dipping. In 2000, I would say between like 2005 and 2010. So they drastically really at the behest of Dan DiDio, who's no longer at DC, they scratched everything. They ended every comic and started with a new number one. And it wasn't just a new numbering system. It was a new origins for everyone. So Superman was now a young kid in Metropolis with a t-shirt and jeans. Batman, they didn't reboot. They let that keep going. They just wrote some good stories. Of course, Batman got the most attention. And it was bad. Like the first couple series of the big ones, Batman stayed consistently good throughout, but Superman had Grant Morrison writing, was good. Most of them were okay at first, but it just got bad. And if they thought things were bad in 2010, no one was interested in DC Comics in like 2015, and the people that did care about them were pissed because we wanted our DC back. So they kind of, it was both lame and awesome. They relaunched everything again and called it Rebirth, and this is in 2016. And what this relaunch was going back to the DC continuity that was started in 1986, but incorporating some of the good stuff from New 52. It was great. It was done really well, but it was kind of lame. It was kind of like, look, we're fixing that thing that we totally screwed up for the last 5 years. And so with that, a lot of new series started too, because it was kind of like a little bit of a boom for DC Comics in 2016. Like I remember going and just buying everything from Rebirth that day, when it started. And so we got to see a new Ragman series.
Great. So yeah, I remember, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but as the lifelong Marvel reader who mostly only read good DC stories that were recommended to me via trade paperback, New 52 was the time when I, for the first time in my life, added titles to my weekly pull list and was just buying DC on a monthly basis. And that continued. So for what it's worth, they gained at least one fan.
Other than Batman?
Yeah, I was getting Wonder Woman. I was getting Justice League Dark. I was getting iVampire. I was getting Swamp Thing. I was getting Animal Man. I think for a while there.
Yeah, those were the best ones.
Yeah, I had pretty good taste, if I don't toot my own horn too much. And then unfortunately, in Rebirth, I continued with some titles, and then, it dwindled, and now I kind of do a mix. But that's not what matters. But great. All right. So thanks. We've got this new opportunity. We've got Rebirth. And as you said, Henry, they've kind of returned to old continuity where they want to, kept New 52 stuff where they want to, and started completely over where they wanted to, especially with tertiary characters like Ragman. So for whatever reason, they once again updated Ragman's origins. You may remember from the episode where we first covered him, he was the son of a Holocaust survivor, and he inherited those rags from his Holocaust survivor father. And probably because in 2016, it's a little harder for a 20-something-year-old to be the son of a Holocaust survivor than it was, in the early 1990s. So they updated his origin, and Rory is now a special ops veteran who, well, we'll save the specifics for the actual issue. So where are we starting, Henry?
We're looking at Ragman Volume 3, Number 1, December 2017. Ragman, Chapter 1, Return Fire, written by Ray Fawkes, penciled and inked by Inaki Miranda, colored by Ava de la Cruz, lettered by Josh Reed, edited by Marie Javins and Diego Lopez. So, as you said, Rory is now a special ops. And the first opening panel is kind of cool. It says, somewhere in the Israeli desert. And it actually looks more like Petra. It looks exactly like Petra. If you've ever been to Petra, Jordan.
I feel like I could pick up pictures that I took in Petra and hold it side by side. And it's like, this is really this. I mean, I got to Petra by crossing over in a lot in the Negev deserts. So, but like, yeah, it feels much more like Petra.
Well, like if you've seen the last scene of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, that's what this panel looks like. It's that, sort of that classical pillar type temple looking thing carved out of a rock. And by the way, in Petra, that's just a facade. You can't go in it like in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. But anyway, the special ops team is supposedly in Israel, but they're in Petra. And they're sneaking into what they're calling, quote, a holy temple. They said the dialogue is, you sure about this, Miller? Anybody finds out we even set foot in this holy temple will be eating blank for blank years. So, which,
like, are they like at the Temple Mount?
Right. Like, what do they mean by holy temple? Like, if you're in Israel and something is called the Holy Temple, that just means the temple. Like,
right. It feels like you're in Jerusalem, not in the desert.
They wouldn't be in the desert. So already, that just seems like they're sort of using Israel and these words as like generic stand-ins for something old and ancient. And because Rory is Jewish, it like sort of ties in. But that's not really what he means. Like in the way that like the Temple of Doom, another Indiana Jones reference, is a temple, but they wouldn't be in a holy temple in the Israeli desert. Like there aren't any of those, by the way.
Ragman and the Holy Temple of Doom. I love it.
So Rory doesn't remember what happened, but the rags were discovered in that temple. And now...
Yeah, there's actually like this whole... It's almost like they found a sarcophagus. They like find this like box or like coffin and they open it up and it's like, what could be contained within? And it's like the rags, as though they were this like deep secret that was being kept away.
Right. Like as if like we're supposed to know about these incredible rags.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you remember the rags, when he was wrapped up in them, it would be the souls of anyone like evil that he killed. Was that who was talking to him when he was back in the old one?
Yeah, I mean, it would like absorb the souls, and I think it was later writers, like especially I remember like in Shadow Pact, Bill Willingham made it like specifically, the souls of the evil people killed would talk to him.
Yeah. So all of Rory's friends died, and now they're the ones who are talking to him through the rags. And
I guess because they were special ops, it's like they're evil enough to be absorbed by the rags.
Well, right. So like, are we assuming that rags take on all souls or like just killers, like people who are killers? Right.
Yeah, let's work with that. Like, I think like killers would be taken. That makes sense to me.
Whereas they were his fathers from the Holocaust. Now his father has nothing to do with the rags.
Right. A legacy hero, no more.
And that's really it for that issue.
Well, there's one last thing, which like just to set up for the next issue.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is that we don't know who it is, but a group of individuals, like Rory's father is attacked, right? Totally separate from the rags, but Rory's father is attacked, and the end of the first issue makes you believe that he's killed, but in actuality, we'll see in the next issue, he's just he's alive and in the hospital. So in Ragman Volume 3, number 2, came out in January 2018, same creative team, so we don't need to get into that. We end up eventually seeing Ragman fighting this like really demonic looking creature, this demonic villain who says to Ragman,
"Thou may not believe in hell, Rory Reagan, but hell knows thee. We are Ruach Tuma, and thou hast our attention."
And then they disappear because it's very dramatic in that way. So it's lots of King James Bible language, a lot of using the thous because I guess they think it sounds more formal. And I always love how like it's just always funny, right? Like the King James Bible was an attempt to translate either, it was an attempt to translate the Bible into more familiar language for the reader at the time. And that was actually like the more intimate form. Like you was high register when you didn't really know someone. Thou implied intimacy. So it's just so funny that it was like intended to be this language that was like, oh, like God's talking to us and God feels so close to us. We feel so close to God with all this thou language. And then like, it has become the like high level Shakespearean biblical, like it sounds so removed and distant and fancy. So it's just kind of funny. And like somehow this linguistic choice that people made to try and make it more accessible, like now everyone's convinced that's how all angels and demons speak. Like it's just, I don't know. It's knowing behind the scenes makes a lot of fiction difficult to get through sometimes.
I didn't know that about that kind of about language. That's interesting.
Yeah, like like in Spanish, there's like tú and usted. So tú is like you is like, oh, I'm familiar and I know you, and usted is more respectful. So you used to be that more respectful version, and thou was like, oh, Henry, we're friends. Thou art mine close friend. Anyway, the one piece of Jewish content, because you may notice the King James Bible is not a Jewish Bible, but what is Jewish here is that this creature self-identifies as Ruach Tuma, which is Hebrew for like an impure spirit, a spirit of impurity, a wind of impurity, right? Like Tuma is the language that's used like when somebody like needs to go and use the mikvah because they've touched something that's tameh, right? Like if they're tameh and they're impure or unclean, they're all sort of failed translations, but like you have some sort of status about you that makes you need like some sort of ritual purification or cleansing, right? So like they are a spirit of impurity. And that's it for issue number 2.
Pretty cool, like little thing though for one issue, just to mention, like cool image and mentioning Ruach Tuma, like
great name.
Are there any like references specifically to a Ruach Tuma anywhere? Like, are you aware of like anything, like? Yeah,
we get, look, Ruach Tuma is actually a reference to Zechariah 13:2. So in Zechariah 13:2, we get our boy Zechariah, one of the minor prophets, letting us know the Haya vayom hahu, and so it was on that day that the Lord of hosts declares, I will erase the very names of the idols from the land. They shall not be uttered anymore. And I will also make the prophets and the unclean spirit vanish from the land. V'gam et haniviim ve'et ruach hatumah a'avir min haaretz. So we get this biblical prophecy implying that the land of Israel has been filled with all sorts of idolatry, and yet the names of the idols one day will no longer be heard throughout the land. And the false prophets, it says Nevi'im, but it's really like the quote unquote prophets. So the false prophet and the unclean spirit, right? It's they avir min haaretz. I will cause it to pass from the land. I will erase it, right? It's this prophecy of like, don't worry, things will be good again. It's actually funny. It kind of sounds like it's like an opposite day. It's like anti-God in a certain way, which is making me think of Black Hammer, but like, right? It's like, there's idols, which are the fake gods instead of the real God. There's fake prophets instead of real prophets. And instead of Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit of God, it's Ruach Tumah, the spirit of like impurity. So we get this like little pasuk. It's the word ruach and tuma, they both appear, but like this is the place where they appear together. And Rashi has some really interesting commentary where he says that ruach tuma is actually just another term for yetzer hara, or one's evil inclination. So that opens up all sorts of connections, because it implies that this thing is like our own base instincts that are always pushing us to do bad things. But of course, the rabbis will go on to say that, yetzer hara, it's not like something we would get rid of entirely. Like there's, rabbinic fanciful imagination around the idea that if the yetzer hara was fully suppressed and we didn't have an evil inclination at all, that like nobody would accomplish anything because they wouldn't have motivation to do things. Nobody would have sex or procreate because they consider that as part of it. Like there's certain drives for fame, success, achievement, sex. Like all of this is associated with yetzer hara, which maybe indicates a complex and troubling relationship that the rabbis had with some of those concepts. But, I think it just sort of implies that like nothing, even in the Torah and even in the Tanakh, like nothing is true evil. Like everything has some redemptive feature to it. Anyway, so this, they appear to be a reference to like the evil, unclean spirit of the land that God's going to wipe away at one point. Well, let's talk about what happens in the next issue. Ragman
Volume 3, number 3, February. Same crew. So on page 49, Rory's talking to his father in the hospital. Brandon, should we read this?
Sure. Yeah. So we get this conversation between father and son. Rory's father says, "What kind of world would this be without sympathy?"
They said they were ruach tuma, Pop, unclean spirits. Remember the old stories, like the ones Rabbi Luria used to tell us? But I got a line on them. I'm going to see if I can help the police.
You got a line on them? I think they were looking for you, Rory. Is there something you should tell me? Rory, I'm your father. What is it you don't want me to know?
Pop, this is going to sound crazy.
And then Rory tells his father the story of the rags and, introduces his father to Ragman, because once again, his father no longer once was the Ragman. It's really weird, Henry, to go from one version of Ragman who says, I'm not religious enough to light the menorah, to another version of Ragman who's like, yeah, the Ruach Tuma, father, just like the rabbi used to tell us. Everybody knows Ruach Tuma. I had to Google where in the Torah, like where.
Yeah, I had to ask you what it was, and you had to Google it. Like, what stories of Ruach Tuma is Rabbi Luria telling them?
Is saying, please find me the synagogue where everybody comes up and like they like somehow they're like, yeah, I can recite Shema, I can read from the Torah for my bar mitzvah, and I know all about the Ruach Tuma.
Maybe Rory, is it possible Rory had this passage from Zechariah for his Haftorah on his bar mitzvah, if he had a bar mitzvah?
There is a Haftorah for Baha'alotcha that comes from Zechariah 2-4, but this is from Zechariah 13. So no dice.
All right.
No dice.
All right. Well, then we should probably move on to the page 76 in issue number 4.
All right. Ragman, volume 4, number 4. And this is where we get to the worst of all of it, because you may have noticed it's been pretty light Jewish content, kind of weird what comes up, but Ragman is hanging out with a character known as Etrigan the Demon, and Etrigan is a rhyming demon. He's kind of a fun character. I think is his name Jason Blood? Is that his real name?
Yeah, in real life he's Jason Blood, and then he says an incantation and becomes the demon. And he has been a villain, like he has been villainous, but he is most fun when he is an ally of the DC superheroes. And
totally,
it's usually when there's something devilish that a hero can't handle. It's always very dramatic. Like, well, should we call Etrigan? No, don't, and Jason Blood's always kind of like, I can't go back to, or something, it's very dramatic, but he's a good guy, Etrigan, for the most part. He's a beloved DC character, I would say.
Yeah. And in this comic, it's like, it's fitting. There's a demonic force. And what we're going to find out is that this demonic force and Etrigan are not on the same side. They are they're fighting and they're both trying, Etrigan at least is trying to convince Ragman they're on the same side. Regardless, he's teaching Rory the history of the suit, which just to review, before Rebirth, the history of the suit is that it was his father's in the Holocaust. It was passed on to him. And later on, we found out that it actually went all the way back to the time of Solomon and Moses and Abraham, and that it was an artifact passed down throughout the Jewish peoplehood for time immemorial to come up and protect the Jewish people when necessary. That's what it used to be. That was the story. And now Etrigan lets us know that the suit was summoned from some non-earthly realm. Okay, cool. Leaves it open the possibility of it being like, Atzilut, right? Or like, Kabbalistic. Right? It could be Jewish, but it gets hijacked. And Etrigan tells us,
stolen high and won in the most unholy war, though in holiness' name it was wielded.
And we see the image of the rags around a crusader from the Crusades with a glowing crucifix on the chest, at which point it brings in another DC character that often appears in stories involving the demonic or the angelic or things of that nature, a guy known as Shining Knight. And Shining Knight sees the Crusader wearing the rags and recognizes that the rags are evil or demonic. So he kills the Crusader, and he's the one who buries the rags in the tomb. And I think the implication is it's the same tomb, the temple where our Rory and his team were at the beginning of this series. So in review, the rags that were previously established to be a weapon for the Jewish people to defend themselves since biblical times were retconned into being a demonic cloak worn by a crusader who most likely slaughtered countless Jews themselves. It went from being a tool to protect the Jewish people to a tool used to kill Jewish people. And I'm sorry, I'm sure that Ray Fawkes didn't mean it, but this to me feels oppressive, if not anti-Semitic.
Of course he didn't mean it. That's Christian hegemony. He doesn't even realize he's doing something so offensive here. At best, it is Jewish erasure, which we've seen before and we will see again. And at worst, it's anti-Semitism. The Crusades were not good for the Jews. Right. Thousands of Jews were killed and Muslims in the name of Jesus Christ. They marched all over the world killing Jews
for many centuries. Yeah, when I got to this, I read this story with so much excitement for what Jewish content did we miss? I can't wait. And when I got to this part, I feel like I texted you the image and my heart just fell. It was such
horrible.
It's horrific, offensive, terrible. I literally feel like I would avoid any comic Ray Fawkes ever writes again.
Yeah.
Which I recognize that's me having an extreme reaction, but dude, you took one of the few Jewish characters I have and took all of his Judaism away from him and turned a Jewish again. I'm repeating myself, but I don't have the words for how infuriating it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this is an interesting conversation, as we're recording this, the whole thing with Whoopi Goldberg and, not understanding Jews as a race, and the Holocaust is happening right now. And this whole conversation about, is this the end of, would this be the end of Ray Fawkes for us? Or is this an opportunity to talk to him and explain to him why this is so horrible? And I think we would probably choose that, if given the opportunity, but it's just bad. It's just not good. This one is inexcusable. If you want to be clever and know history and throw in the Crusades, you have to know what were happening during the Crusades. And you've already established that there is Judaism within this version of Roy Regan. It would be one thing if he just wasn't Jewish character, but he is.
Right.
And you're quoting the Torah and using Hebrew. Then you have to know, if you're going to, show how smart you are by knowing all that information and that deep cut of Ruach Tumah, then I'm sorry, you have to know that Crusaders killed a lot of Jews.
but I think it goes back to what you said, Henry, which is that this is a result of Christian hegemony where they don't even realize why it's offensive. Because again, I'm sure that his thought was the comic makes it abundantly clear that the Crusaders are the bad guys. Shining Knight, who's like a hero among heroes, kills the guy. So he probably was like, look at me doing this good thing and showing how bad the Crusades were. What he doesn't realize, I think, right, is like the emotional impact it has on readers. Although, maybe it's just me, you, and the people who listen to our podcast, but to have that Jewish character, one of so few who has like an established legacy identity that is interwoven with Jewish history, and to then take that Jewish history and use it to clothe and garb people in the sense of an unholy war, in a way, is that not what, depending on your understanding of whether Judaism and Christianity branched from each other or Christianity branched off from Judaism, but like doesn't so much of the oppression of Christianity do that? They take Judaism's own history and rituals and use it to bludgeon Jews. Right. They use it like it plays into this larger, deeply troubling system where this thing that's probably just a cool idea for him, there's no awareness whatsoever on how this might actually like be a really bad look.
I would have much rather them completely erased Judaism from Rory, because then we wouldn't cover it. You and I might look at, hey, there was a Rebirth series. Then we might thumb through it. Oh, there was no Judaism in it. I think they must have retconned that out. All right, fine. So like, I would have been mad about that, but this is way worse. Yeah.
It's like we've been upset by things, but I really don't think we've ever covered anything that has upset me more than this did.
Yeah, same. I mean, we've probably had like bigger outrages, like, outwardly on this podcast, but there is some, but I'm saying to you and to everyone out there, this is the most angry I've ever been about something like this in a like poorly done Judaism in a comic ever.
Yeah. And it's one of those like, I don't know if it's because in prepping for this episode, we like ranted back and forth to each other, but it's almost like I'm just
exhausted.
Sometimes I'm exhausted. Exactly. Like I'm so exhausted that like I might not sound as angry as I have for other things, but in part that's because it's like I was angry about them, but like not 100% angry. So you can almost like play into the anger. And this is like I'm so upset that I'm just drained immediately. Right. Like the number of times I've seen tweets this week and others where it's like the Jews are tired. The Jews are so tired. Right. Like that's how I feel seeing this. I'm like I'm just so tired of seeing it get done so poorly.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of the thing. Like, as I mentioned before, like not to get too much into like social and political issues, but like this thing with Whoopi Goldberg, it's like you see it and you're just like, oh, come on now, like really, or the wrestler Brian Kendrick, who recently was announced to he left WWE and is going to AEW, and then found out that he was making comments denying the Holocaust, and like other crazy anti-Semitic conspiracies. And it's just
I missed that one. You'll have to show me that afterwards.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, that was big news last couple days. But it's like, oh God, here we go. And of course, any vandalism on several different places in Chicago, synagogues and then of course, in Texas, everything. Like we're just like we're tired of it. And so it's like you and I are trying to unwind and read a comic. And, this should be like so joyous. And it usually is, like finding these things. But it's sort of like we're reporting on this thing that's bad instead of highlighting something wonderful. Instead of being able to say, like, look, a Jewish thing. Yay, we're seen, which we love talking about on this podcast, being seen. Here, it's like, I'd prefer you not to see me here if this is the way you're going to show me that you see me.
Yeah.
And that's why I really understand about like the exhausted things. Like really,
that was our return to Ragman. That was the downer part of the episode. We're going to move now from the sadness of Ragman to really an interesting piece in Moon Knight. And it's funny, Henry, ever since we did episodes on Moon Knight and Ragman back to back, they've kind of been associated in my mind. And I was just telling you before we recorded, the new trailer for the Disney Plus series on Moon Knight has the Moon Knight costume just like expand outward on him. And I kind of was like, did Moon Knight turn into Ragman? So the two continue to be intertwined. But this is like, not quite hot off the presses, but we are about to cover like the most recent comic we can, and that being Moon Knight Volume 9, number 5. But this came out November 17th, 2021. So we are covering this just a scant like 2.5 months after it came out, right? So really exciting. Let's go in and see what new Jewish things have happened to Moon Knight. Once again, this is Moon Knight, Volume 9, Number 5, entitled Horoscope. Written by Jed MacKay, penciled by Alessandro Cappuccio, colored by Rochelle Rosenberg, lettered by VC's Corey Petit, and edited by our boy, Tom Brevoort. So we're in the midst of the opening arc of Jed MacKay's run on Moon Knight, and a recurring theme throughout this arc has been Moon Knight going to see a therapist and talking things out with his therapist. And he's
as Moon Knight,
right? Not Mark Spector, not Stephen Grant, but as Moon Knight. So Moon Knight is talking to his therapist, and he's talking specifically about the difficulty of growing up Jewish and growing up the son of a rabbi.
Of course, there's being raised Jewish, and then there's being raised by a rabbi. My father was the kindest, gentlest man I've ever known, but there was never anything kind or gentle in me. He was a man of peace. He hated violence. And I thought that made him weak, a weak man serving an indifferent God.
Oh, I like Jed MacKay's dialogue here is just on point with like, in a way, he's playing a lot with what Max Bemis wrote in his Moon Knight run with Moon Knight struggling with his Judaism and what it meant. And he's also playing, of course, with our first Moon Knight stories we covered, written by Rabbi Zelenetz himself, of being the son of a rabbi. But like, I really love the way he's articulated it as it's not just that he views his father as weak, but like, he sees his father hates violence and he feels like he never sees God responding. So like, why does he even bother? I really like this. It goes on. We're not going to read the quotes directly, but it goes on to talk about the Israelites, escaping from slavery, being persecuted so many ways, and that Moon Knight views that as the Jews being weak and not fighting back. But his father frames Jewish survival as perseverance, right? Like it's something to be envied because they survived, they persevered, and they keep things going. But Moon Knight views that as being too weak to fight back. And it reminds me of, if you remember when we covered Sabra and we got into Justice, the character Justice and his growing up, where he would sit there and he'd be like, but why don't we fight back? And there's this real thing for superheroes wanting to fight, which, I think we talked about it then also. There's that tension of like, I don't want heroes to always solve everything with fisticuffs because I do believe in talking things out. But anyway, we get that. And then on page 12, Moon Knight is really struggling with this, as he acknowledges, like, I didn't think twice to let myself be resurrected by an Egyptian god and start following a new deity, right? He finally on the page mentions the tension of a Jewish superhero being empowered by an Egyptian god.
Right. Well, I just want to say, like, he's very explicit about it. He said, because those were our stories, weren't they? We lost our homes, our land. We were enslaved and then escaped out into the desert. And so he's like, really, I don't even think Moon Knight has been even implicit about that tension that you mentioned. And here it's being very explicit. I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting things about Moon Knight is that like his superpowers come from an Egyptian god and he's Jewish.
Right. And so we're going to kind of come into the end of his monologue here. So
all my life, I thought that my father was weak because he was kind and gentle and would never raise a hand in violence. But he would have died before he broke faith with God, before recognizing another. You shall have no other gods before me, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God. When it came down to it, I was the weak one. I sold out everything I had been raised to believe in to save my own neck, to further indulge my addiction to violence. My father's God took us out of Egypt. My new God has kept us there. That's heavy.
It's so heavy. It's so it's heavy, and yet I love it because it's like, since I knew Moon Knight was Jewish, like we're beating a dead horse at this point, but like I've been waiting and waiting to see this on panel. I've been waiting so long to see Moon Knight finally acknowledge this, and I'm just like, I love that he finally said it, that someone finally put the words in his mouth, and like that language, like my father's God took us out of Egypt. My new God has kept us there. Wow. Like it has me thinking of Passover as this ritual time of telling the story, and that part of the real power of Passover is recognizing that like if God took us out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim, the narrow place once, God can do it again, that every year at Passover, we have the hope of being freed again. And like, now I'm going to be thinking every Passover, like maybe Moon Knight can be freed this time. Maybe he can be freed from his bondage. Maybe he can finally leave Egypt. You know, you read that quote in there so beautifully, Henry, but he's got that quote directly coming from a Seret HaDibrot, from the 10 commandments or the 10 utterances. He's quoting Exodus 23 and then Exodus 25 when he says, I, the Lord, am your God, and I, the Lord, am a jealous God, right? Don't have any other gods before me. Like he's purposely contradicting and showing like it's very explicit. God says no other gods. And I took a new God from the place God took us out of to say, right? Like it pinpoints it down. And I know some listeners, you may or may not have a belief in a deity. You may or may not have a belief in God. Like what's relevant here is that within the story and the mythos and the text and the language of the Jewish people, inherent and central to that is the conception of one God who took us out of Egypt. And there have been people who have prayed to that God, and there have been people who have wrestled with that God, and there have been people who've refused to believe in that God. But there's always the one God that gets not believed in or wrestled with or prayed to. And now we have this Jewish superhero who the weirdest thing about him, in our very first episode, I'm pretty sure we listened to an interview with Dan Slott saying, what kind of Jewish role model is Moon Knight? He punched his father and serves an Egyptian God, right? And finally, he acknowledges it and admits it as something that makes him weak, and that he admires his father's strength of faith and commitment. But Moon Knight gave it up in a second.
Yeah. He seems very comfortable with it too, even though, I mean, he's talking it out in therapy and at, I guess, the kitchen table, but he seems like very matter of fact about it. It's like, this is an intense thing. I've definitely thought about it. It's almost like he's talking to us. Like, I know you've been waiting for me to address this. I'm addressing it now. Here's how I feel about it. Yes, it is attention. You know, it makes me nervous about the Moon Knight show, because I just don't think they're going to go there. I think they're going to either completely erase it, or there's going to be some vague reference to him being Jewish. But I don't see them certainly.
We'll get another mezuzah on the door.
Right, in the background.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but anyway, I mean, Jed MacKay, it's interesting. You know, normally I get annoyed when the Jewish thing in a comic is tied up with either something specifically biblical or God, because, like, to me, so much of how I experience Judaism doesn't necessarily have to do with any version of God in my day-to-day or the Bible, you know, like the Tanakh, like. And so, I wish they would have explored, something rabbinic or cultural, right? But here it actually makes sense because it's so specific. It's so specific that this character, you can't divorce the biblical history of Judaism with the biblical history of Egypt, whether it's complete history or not. And here he doesn't even try. He completely marries them together and says that this is weird and problematic. So yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about Jed MacKay. I don't know his writing unless, I'm sure maybe I've read something that you've pointed out to me before. But
fun fact, Henry, not that there was that much, but he was also the writer of the Black Cat series in which we saw the photo from the Thing's wedding.
Oh, that's fun. So he was the writer of last episode
also.
I listened very closely. Yeah. I should go back and listen to that. Sorry, Jed. but I mean, you know, I'm sort of joking, but I really am appreciative of Jed MacKay. Like, that's great. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about, you know, the great Jewish writers like Bendis and Rucka, but, you know, and I shouldn't assume, I don't know Jed MacKay's religion, so I shouldn't assume that based on his name, but you know, he really did a mitzvah here. Yeah, I mean, you know, we couldn't have two sort of better comparisons when it comes to Jewish representation, right? Like Ray Fawkes' example of the opposite of what you should do, the worst thing you could possibly do. Like, please just don't even bother writing about Jews if you're going to do this. Mm-hmm. And this like really well thought out, respectful, you know, it's actually very funny because I think, Henry, that the first time you and I looked at this issue, we both were like, yeah, it feels pretty minor. Like, I wish there was more, which gets back to what you said of like, maybe we always get greedy for more. And then I think the more we sat with it and the more we didn't just rush through the issue, but actually read those words, it was like, wait a minute, this is huge. Yeah. And it's really wonderful. It is, I think, a really, positive and affirming direction to be able to go in, and so positive and affirming that we can even forgive the fact that that when it said God in the quote, for some reason it said G-D. Oh, G-D. Like, what? Why was he cutting and pasting from Safaria or something, or not even Safaria? Like, was he cutting and pasting from? I'm just going to say it. I think G-D is stupid. I know plenty of people write it when they're writing out God, and we're trained to do it. But God is the word God, G-O-D, is not one of the Hebrew or Jewish God's names. It's an English word. And so you don't need to put the dash in. It's just, or, you know, L-RD, you know, for Lord. Like, it's dumb. And so seeing it in a comic, he didn't need to do that, but okay, fine. It's not, I think it's stupid in general. I don't think it's specifically stupid here. I'm sorry if you write G/D and you're offended by this. I'm not trying to offend you. I just think it's unnecessary. That's all.
Well, when you look at the mitzvot that are suggesting, right, the commandments say not to take God's name in vain and not to write it out. It's usually, you know, originally talking about the tetragrammaton of Yud Hey Vav Hey and not writing that out. And Jews became so weary of writing it out that they would, you know, write Yud Yud instead, right? For like Adonai, they would say Adonai and they would write Yud Yud. And then like even Adonai, like that started to become like so much of God's name that I was like, well, maybe we shouldn't write that out so much. So then you start getting to something like Hashem, right? Like the name. Okay, now we're getting very, very safe. Or you get it to God in English. And then people are like, oh, God, like I know it's a word, but like that's God. So I want to do G-D. It feels like we keep coming up with new words to make it okay. And then those new words get used so much that we're like, oh no, we got to protect this new word. Right. And it's what I like about it is that it's almost a sense of contagious holiness. Like God's holiness is just sort of like expanding outward and outward. So I agree with you. I think it's a little silly. I don't ever, like, I have no problem writing G-O-D. I don't think it needs to be G-D. And I can kind of sit back and be like, that's kind of neat that happens.
I mean, I went to Orthodox Jewish day school, and, you know, the problem with that was that like things like Jewish history were taught from an Orthodox Jewish perspective. And so you weren't necessarily learning actual history. And like, if we're ever like writing about something in English, like even in like a rabbinic class or something, like if we were encouraged to write G/D, like, I don't think if I ever wrote G-O-D, like I would get a circle and a line through it and like points off, but like it was certainly part of the culture to write G/D. And it didn't occur to me to think whether that was unnecessary or not, but I certainly do now.
Yeah. Well,
but it's not Jed MacKay's fault. He did a great job. Like, really, you know, this could have gone totally the other way. Like, assuming I don't know if Jed McKay, what kind of research he did or whatever, but that's a very tough line to walk, whereas you're referencing something that is potentially super problematic. Like if this had been written a dozen other ways, it would have been bad. We would have been yelling about it. Like if, just he had completely denounced Judaism and said that, his Egyptian God is better and bad. I don't know. Like there are a million ways this could have gone badly. And referencing something that's problematic and not making it worse, but actually just opening up a conversation about it is really hard to do. And that's just good writing.
It's very good writing. And I find myself wondering the degree to which we should be appreciating what happens when a Jewish author writes a Jewish character and then what that sets the next author up for. Because I'm just thinking that, again, the preceding run of Moon Knight was written by Max Bemis, the front man of the band Say Anything, and someone who's been very public about his Judaism and is not afraid to write about his struggles with it, his neuroses regarding it, right? Like he gets into the thick of it, and he covered some issues that were challenging and difficult and really engaged with Moon Knight's Judaism. That was probably also a creative way of engaging with Max's own Judaism, right? Mm-hmm. But I wonder if we would get this amazing Jed McKay issue if Judaism had not been such a prominent feature in the most recent run, right? It's like when a new writer takes on a character, my understanding is that A, they have their pitch for what they want to do with it, but B, they probably go back and they do research on the character, or they have editors who are doing things, or they go to one of those Marvel encyclopedias to be like, well, what are the things they need to know about Moon Knight? And certain things get featured. And obviously something that happened in one comic once upon a time in 1986 in one panel and never gets referenced again is not going to be as important as something that gets repeated by future authors. So when Moon Knight's Judaism gets, written about by Rabbi Zelenitz and then picked up by in a more recent one, right? Like Bendis had one image of it, but he didn't really write about it. And then Max Bemis writes about it. Like, I think the fact that it was so fresh in being relevant, right? In the same way with The Thing, once he's out as Jewish, it just keeps popping up. And then it's at his wedding and now it's popping up and it just keeps appearing and appearing and appearing. So I just think that there's maybe something really wonderful that when we present more of the character's Judaism, I wonder if that makes the next or the subsequent writers more likely to also represent their Judaism.
Mm-hmm. I'll go with that. I mean, we were talking about it in the last episode of just how, when we saw that thing, the Thing image, that it's part of the canon now. That so maybe, yeah. I mean, and maybe it, to a certain degree, Marvel, because it's one long continuous universe and story for the most part, there's more attention to, the Marvel Bible, the character Bible kind of thing than in DC. I don't know. But either way, it was great. I'm really pleased.
It was
happy
wonderful.
We're ending on a high note here.
We're ending on this high note because, Henry, believe it or not, we are running out of time. We thought that this return to Heroes Pass was just going to be a sequel, but surprise, surprise, listeners, it's going to be a GD trilogy.
G/D trilogy.
Yeah. It's a G/D trilogy. A God trilogy? Yes, Will Eisner wrote it. We're going to continue this review of characters. We've got some smaller stuff and it's really special treat in store for next episode, but really lovely to spend some time again and to return to Ragman and Moon Knight. Can't wait to see who we return to next time. But until then, I'm Brandon Bernstein.
I'm Henry Bernstein.
No relation.
You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Jewish Comics Pod, or you can email us at jewishcomicspodcast@gmail.com.